Now, as part of the quick overview of Cubase 8 as a whole, how I use it, let's just go to the mixer page. And what you see right here on the left is the visibility column, and right next to it you see the zones color, the zone column. We get back to that later as well. Here you can choose what configuration you want to be seeing on this screen. And not to get too much into detail at this point, because we will later, you see I made a few of these presets. One is the groups out, and if I select this, it shows here all the groups, standard groups out that I made. So we see low percussion, low hits, other low drums, metal drums, timpanis, synthesizers 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if I move this slider over, you see it just keeps going, keeps going. These are all quad groups out. And as you can see, I also put icons in there. So it's a little easier for me if we need to work quickly where certain things are. So, you know, this is a guitar. So obviously, you know, we're looking at a guitar quad group out. And we just keep going, and then we see 3 Metasynth outputs, that program that I mentioned earlier, that is great for sound design. Then we have some general sound design outputs. Then we see here strings output long, strings output short, and then we see brass, we see woodwinds, orchestral 2D samples. So I'm just keep going, then we see some piano, then we see a couple of additional outputs that I made. Just keep going, so more quad additional outputs. Then on the right here we see my master output, we see master stereo output, and we see the click master. And then on the right here we see the control room. Now this is new for me in Cubase 8, because before 8 I was not working completely in the box. I would have a similar setup like this, but all these subgroups would then go out as individual quads to Pro Tools, and I would mix it in Pro Tools. But since Run All Night, which I scored in December 2014 into January, February 2015, I started using the control room, because now I'm completely in the box within Cubase, and I'm allowed to do all the bouncing offline. But we get very much into detail of that when we go into the routing in Cubase 8 and how I'm able to do that and what is required to do that. So now we go to my next group, which is the JXL VST and audio selection. So if I select that, I don't see my group tracks anymore, even though I keep seeing on the right my master fader, my click master, and my control room. But if I don't want to see that, I can easily take that away by select here what I want to see, or you go here to the channel visibility agent. And even here, the setup of your window, you could say, oh, I don't want to see the control room at this point, and you click it away. So you have a little more real estate for your tracks, which we will need, because in this particular template, let's just scroll all the way to the right. We're looking roughly at 1730 VST returns, which is quite a lot. So let's go all the way to the left. So here we see the dialogue effects and the mix coming in from Pro Tools that we discussed earlier, the iPad input, the Mac input, the signal generator. And then we go to the first set of instruments. So here we see roughly what we see when we were in the arrangement window, when I went through all these group tracks. There are a few slight differences, because MIDI tracks do not show up in this particular window. It's just audio tracks and VST instruments and VST returns. So you see it's a very elaborate list. You also see that a lot of the panning information is not straightforward to the front or back, because I'm working in surround, or better to say quad. And also here we see the icons that I use for certain type of instruments. So it's a little easier for me to find where certain things are, even though I know pretty much where everything is. And that leads us, you know, to the string department, more strings, and then some brass, and then some LESS strings, all the way to the woodwinds and some pianos, and then we get to zebras, and the divas, and some extra test channels that we don't use at this point, but they're ready to go. So now let's go back to this group again, and let's go to JXL FX. So now we're just looking at just the effects channels and the effects that are inserted on them. And you see the first set of effects are just panned to the back. And then here we see effects that are going to the front and to the back, front and to the back. So we'll get more about that later. And here you see that every output that we just discussed in the group outputs folder has its own unique effects tracks that go with it. We'll get more into that later on when I talk about the routing and how the architecture was set up in Cubase 8. Also here you see the icons that go with what effect it's married to. So if we look at this particular channel, it says lexicon front, guitars clean. So I gave it a guitar icon, so I know, even though this is an effects channel, I know it's used for a clean guitar. So let's just move on. And you see it's a quite elaborate list of effects channels. So you do need a lot of DSP to be able to handle this. And so one of the reasons how I'm able to control this really well is using UAD plugins, which I showed you in a different tutorial yesterday. These are all calculated on DSP cards that are inserted into this machine. And I'm using the Apollo as the sound card, which is a beautiful sounding piece of equipment. And this allows me to put more plugins into this session. And if we look at the DSP here, there's so many plugins inserted in this session, but the session is roughly at 30%. And it holds very steadily when I write suites for over an hour or so. It stays very, very stable. So let's just keep going on these effects. And it keeps going, keeps going. We're now in the sound design department. And then we get to some of the delays that are inserted here. So that's it for the effects channel as a broad overview. And now let's go to the last group that I created in the mixer page, which is the VCA channels. And at this point, you see these VCAs are absolutely not assigned to anything. They just sit there. But once I get into mixing, I can insert these things right here to any of the groups that I have created. So if I were to say, let's assign these to the Sertos that I uniquely created for the movie 300 Rise of an Empire, then you see it's right there, and then you can control it fully from that point on.